Hello and welcome everyone to today's Dive-In webinar presented by WTW. In the spirit of reconciliation, WTW acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. My name is Claire King and I'm the Head of Marketing for WTW in Australasia. As you would have seen from the video that we played a moment ago, WTW is a global sponsor of the Dive-In Festival, and I've been honoured over the last few years to be involved in running our local Dive-In events, and this year is certainly no different. The theme for the 2022 festival is Building Braver Cultures. So it aims to empower organisations and individuals to build environments where colleagues feel safe and valued and respected and free to express themselves. And I'm particularly excited about our session today, titled Out of Sight but Not Out of Mind, because it's really not a typical presentation, if you like. It's going to be a conversation that I anticipate will be quite raw and honest, and will really drill down into the heart of that theme around making people feel respected and valued and safe in their work environment. You do have the opportunity to be involved in the conversation by submitting questions for our speakers via the Q&A panel, and we've allowed some time at the end to answer as many of these as possible. So you're welcome to submit those throughout the session as we go, or you can wait until we get to that Q&A component at the end. I'm now excited to introduce our speakers. So Jane Panaccio has been a speech pathologist for over 30 years and is currently working in a private hospital in Victoria, Australia, managing a team of 18 staff. Jane was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease at the age of 16, and so she's overcome many challenges associated with living with an illness that others cannot necessarily see nor fully understand the effects of. Jane leads a group of volunteers to raise funds for research into a cure, and has also been an active member of a support group for young people who are contemplating either surgery or coming to terms with what is their new normal. Welcome, Jane, and thank you. We're so pleased to have you join us today.
Good afternoon, Claire. Thank you for having us, or me.
You're welcome. Our conversation host today is Brent Lehmann. So Brent is the General Manager, Affinity and Commercial, Australasia for WTW, and he's been with the company for over 20 years. And outside of WTW, Brent is co-founder of Improve Me, which is a platform that helps professional athletes and students and employees to identify their key strengths and create future career pathways. And Brent's passion for helping others with their career development really stems from personally being met with the challenge of an unforeseen medical diagnosis also that required him to take a significant change in direction early on in his career. Welcome, Brent.
Thank you, Claire, and hello, Jane.
Brent is also a past chairman and current ambassador for the Gutsy Group, and we're really pleased to have the Gutsy Group as our session co-sponsor today. The Gutsy Group is a not-for-profit organisation that is dedicated to raising funds for medical and scientific research into the cause, prevention, management and cure of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. So these are lifelong gastrointestinal disorders that commonly present to people in adolescence and early adulthood. And interestingly, Australia has one of the highest prevalences of these conditions in the world, with more than 85,000 people affected, and those numbers are expected to exceed 100,000 by around 2023. So the characteristics of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis are highly debilitating, but they're conditions that are essentially invisible to others. So you may well know someone who suffers from one of them, but you may be unaware that this is the case. Brent and Jane will explore just how these and other hidden conditions impact the sufferers physically, emotionally and mentally, and what leaders and organisations can do to create a work culture that supports those with non-visible conditions. So without further ado, I will hand over to Brent to kick the session off. Thanks, Brent.
Thanks, Claire, and thank you for that very warm introduction. and I appreciate obviously the acknowledgement of the Gutsy Group given my past involvement along with Jane. Jane, firstly, welcome, and I really want to thank you so much for agreeing to share your story with this audience that's participating today. It's a very powerful message, and there's a lot to learn from your experience along the way. You and I have known each other for quite a long time now, and which is due both to our involvement in the Gutsy Group for an extended period of time, but also along with our shared experience in living with one of the conditions that the Gutsy Group supports. I'm certainly looking forward to exploring this a little bit more further with you, and I think it's going to be a very informative conversation that we can share with those that are listening in today. So, following on from Claire's introduction, I thought a good place to start would be to briefly talk about what a hidden condition actually is, because I think people may be surprised that there's far more of them out there and there's far more sufferers than we realise. And I think you've got some information that can be quite poignant in terms of how we understand the depth of what's happening in the community today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brent, and yeah, thanks for the introduction as well. And I'll just clarify, I was involved with the Gutsy Group for over 20 years, not currently involved at the charity level, but certainly still a huge advocate and supporter of that. Yeah, so looking up some stats for today, I guess. The Australian Institute of Health and Wellbeing released a report in March 2020. So considering that that's probably changed again since then with people's, I guess, experience of COVID and the impact that that's had on people's lives. But the report in 2020 identified 8 chronic conditions, which were things like arthritis, asthma, back pain, cancer, heart disease, mental health conditions, diabetes, and chronic obstructive airway disease. And all of those are pretty much invisible conditions. And the data showed that 47% of Australians between 2017 and 2018 identified as having and living with at least one of those conditions. I said, I imagine those conditions, well, sorry, not those conditions, but I imagine the invisible illnesses have likely grown since our experience with COVID. And then what is an invisible illness? Any medical condition that's not outwardly visible to others, and often even to healthcare professionals as well. So it includes those conditions that I mentioned, but also there are many, many more. So gastrointestinal disease, dementia, and those autoimmune diseases that we're probably going to talk a little bit about today. And not all of them are preventable. So, and many are chronic. And so it's difficult to kind of quantify because they are complex, they're long term, and they vary over time. So often there'll be flares or different responses to medication, perhaps hospitalisations, and people experience those illnesses to different degrees. So no two people have the same journey, basically.
Yeah, and I think the important thing here, Jane, is that what might come as a surprise to a lot of people is it's definitely a lot more prevalent hidden conditions in the community than we ever realised, which then flows on to work as well. So those of us at work, whether we're employees, leading employees, participating in the workforce, we're surrounded by a lot of people who may be managing scenarios that we're completely unaware of. Going back, bringing the story back to you for a moment, Jane, and focusing on your story, can you tell us a little bit about when you first became unwell, when you received your diagnosis, and how this impacted you both personally and professionally?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with this autoimmune disease in my mid-teens, basically. I was 16. It came out of the blue. There were pretty frightening symptoms at the time when I think back. And it coincided with, changes, becoming a teenager, hormonal changes. And at the time I was also made to feel that it would all be, quite okay, it will pass, despite that there was significant weight loss and I was having difficulty eating, keeping food down. And looking back, I was probably depressed with all of this, these things that were happening to me as well. And finally so I was unwell from probably about 12, and then finally a diagnosis at 16, which to me was a bit of a relief. It was a relief having a label, because even at that age, I kind of started to, I guess, not have your flight or flight responses. Mine was to fight, and to find out as much as I could. And so in my case, knowledge became power. And so since then, I've been, I guess, trying to find ways to manage the condition for me, but as well as, the involvement with the Gutsy Group to try and advocate and increase awareness and also increase funding for research. My specialist was and always has been quite amazing and allowed us to have a very collaborative and holistic approach to my care over that time, which was really important for me to know that I had some say, I guess, in how we were managing the condition. But it did involve taking lots of medication, many different medications over the years, and in order to try and manage the disease. But as is often the nature of an autoimmune condition, I would reach kind of a healthy stage, and then as soon as I tried to drop that medication, the disease would kind of, come back with a vengeance. And so I was constantly on this roller coaster of taking medications, which then have their own side effects. And so for people out there living with an invisible illness who are on medication, that's probably, something very familiar to them as well. I imagine, Brent, that would probably be a similar situation for you in the early days.
Yeah,
as well.
Absolutely. And I think one of the topics that you touched on is the age of diagnosis, and given the experiences that we've both been through, that age profile anywhere from sort of 15 to 25, when you're trying to conclude your high school education, embark on tertiary education and enter the workforce, which is such an important time in our lives, that it does have a direct impact on what we're trying to achieve. And in my case, it necessitated a change in direction. And there's also a lot of compromises that we need to make. I was interested to ask, in terms of how you went on that journey when you first started to enter the workforce. Was there a close network that you would confide in? And what level of support did you receive from your employers at that stage, if they were in fact aware of what was unfolding?
Yeah, I'll go back a little bit. I guess the other thing to keep, and what you said about the age groups and things, that for those of us living and working and managing an invisible illness, a chronic illness, is too that, as you said, we have to go through secondary college or secondary school like that. I went through uni with that condition, and so the number of hospitalisations and the times that those things were interrupted was quite significant. So it took me a long time to get to where I am now with respect to I guess that perseverance and that I guess probably a little bit tenacity is, I guess, what people might describe as too, that, I obviously had a bit of a goal that I wanted to achieve. So in the first workplaces I had, I actually became quite unwell in the first two jobs I had, without realising how sick I was. And so the first position, probably didn't actually talk about it much at work at that time. I was a new graduate. It was kind of what I was used to, and then became quite unwell with the case of chickenpox because I was so immunosuppressed. I ended up in hospital and ICU, and I think I did go back to work, but would have had probably a month off or so, and I really don't remember that time at all, which is probably a blessing. Then the next position I had, that both of those were regional, and I went to regional New South Wales. And yes, I did speak to my immediate supervisor about the condition because, again, I became unwell, many miles from home, no support networks. Did have a friendship group developed there. And so they were very supportive in giving me linking me into the services in that area that I wasn't aware of because it was so far away from home. So at that time, I pretty much worked, even though I was feeling quite unwell, and so I did need their support then. It was a contract, so it ended anyway, so I got to the end of that. The next job was a Melbourne job, and that actually I chose to speak up immediately because I had to postpone the interview because I was actually in hospital. So rather than not be honest, I chose to be honest. The interview went ahead when I was ready, and then I got the job, thankfully. So that particular position, it never went kind of beyond the immediate manager or, into HR or anywhere like that. But I was very supported by my immediate supervisor and the team around me. The condition was such that I would often be extremely fatigued or have, excruciating pain in my belly. And I recall, lying down on the floor for a quick kip for, a half hour or something like that, just to get over that and then keep going with my role. And my role was facing patients as well. So, I had to, juggle that, obviously. And I remember working through, despite feeling the symptoms that no one else could see, you put on a brave face and you keep going. But I did have the support of the immediate manager and immediate team around me, which was, thankfully what I needed at the time.
And you might be like me here, Jane, too, in the journey that I've been on as well, is I have very clear recollections of, the organisations and leaders that have supported me through some difficult times, and also have very clear recommendations of those that didn't as well. So, the level of support that we get from those around us, I don't think we could ever understate. You probably, I know you're a very humble person, Jane, and you probably don't realise the inspiration that you have to many people around you, me included, because those of us who've known you for a long time would certainly say you've successfully managed your health for many years now, once you got some stability, and your career's progressed greatly in that time. You're now in a leadership role yourself in managing other people. How do you address your own work-life balance in a demanding role while juggling everything at the same time?
Yeah, so I've been in this role now for 7 years, and probably for a little while there, things were going well. So in this particular role that I've eventually, come to, post having, kids and family and that sort of thing, I've come to this stage. I was very well for a very long time, and I wasn't taking medication either. So just for the listeners, I did have some fairly major surgery some years ago. Once I did that, my health kind of really did stabilise for a long time. And so in this current role that I'm in, I probably got, into the second year, and now for the next 5 years, the condition has come back, and so I'm back on medication and things. So when I got the role, it wasn't a huge consideration for me because I was feeling, that much better and I was well. So I guess the things that I do now, most recently with the disease returning, and I still, seem asymptomatic to anybody else who's looking in, is that I'm lucky that the work I do is part-time. So I'm, in part-time employment, which is a blessing and a curse, I guess. You always end up giving probably more hours than you're allocated to. But while the role is demanding, I make sure that I do fit it into the times that I have. So because of my condition, I know what I can, how far I can push myself, and what I can do. But I always make sure that I'm, achieving the duties that I've got to do. The current manager has been. Can I just
come back to that? Can I just come back to that point, Jane? It's and I think it's an important one for anyone living with a hidden condition. And you really highlighted it, because I go through the same experience myself, and I know others do as well. Is we become very stoic in terms of our approach, and my view has always been, no matter how I present myself from one day to the next, I want no one to be able to tell whether I'm well or unwell on that particular day. So there's an inner strength that gets created through people not just with what we live with, but with other conditions as well. And
Sure.
I think what you just mentioned then in terms of not wanting people to believe that you have an inability to achieve something or do something is that stoicism really starts to take over, and we become a little bit immune to that ourselves.
Yeah, I think so. And and we've talked about it before in that for me, and this isn't everybody's case, but I've had this condition for such a long time that it is part of, who I am. And I just need to sort of get on with it. So it's there. I need to manage it. But I've also got other things I need to do. So it's that balance. And it's a fine line finding that balance, and everybody will be different. So, yeah, and it's not so much that, I think I'm doing anything different to what anybody else can do effectively. So at the moment, the question was, how do I address the balance? I do try to compartmentalise, so work is work, and then home is home. And as I say, I am lucky in that my role is part-time, and it's also a little bit flexible, so that if I do have to have doctor's appointments, if I do need to go back, which I was having recently, monthly injections, I can fit that in around work. But I also am very upfront with my manager when I need to take that time, and say, this is what I need to do. Is that okay? She's never said no, which is great. But yeah, and there's that trust there that, I can trust her to have that information, and she can trust me that I will, make it all kind of work as well. So I think trust and respect is that really important part of, any relationship in the workplace. The other, I guess, I do is that and it might be older age rather, I try to make sure that when I am not at work, that I do things for me. And so, more recently, exercise is important, always has been, but now more so. And certainly, well-being, so, meditation or just being, I guess, in the moment is really important, because I think our bodies need that to just, regenerate and not recover so much, but to get that energy back again another day. Yeah.
I think one of the key points that you just spoke about then, Jane, too, which a lot of people can learn from, is the flexibility piece. There's organisations that have got a capacity and a willingness to embrace flexible work arrangements. I don't think there's any doubt that they have an ability to access potentially an untapped market of talent who may be experiencing different challenges, but may be able to give all of themselves for a defined period of time that may be overlooked if there's a concentration on full-time employment. And I think you're a genuine case in point about how valuable that can be.
Yeah, I think so. And obviously, yes, it doesn't work for all industries, but I think that, and certainly the last couple of years has shown, we can work remotely. We can be trusted to work remotely. We probably give more when we work remotely. And that flexibility of being, either on site or then, elsewhere to work as well. So there's a lot of opportunity out there that we can tap into to make it work, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Now, one of the things that, and you've mentioned it before, around having been visited by the condition once again recently, I was going to say that it is always tough when we have to manage a hidden condition like we do, and that from my experience can have a tendency to reappear at the most inconvenient time you could possibly imagine. So I know you've just spoken about balancing your own needs as an individual, living with a hidden condition, but with now casting your mind into your role as a manager, who's expected to lead and provide support to others who then may also be experiencing different challenges. Have you got any guidance or advice on how you approach that topic as well?
Again, based on my experience, I think I probably have not more, but I am able to be empathetic and compassionate to people's situations. I don't need to know as a manager all the ins and outs of people's conditions, and that's probably how I've also approached my own, journey with living with an invisible illness. But I certainly hope that I have that open door, that people feel comfortable coming to me to talk through things. We are busy, and so what I do like people to kind of, if I ask them how they're going, I would expect some honesty with that, and that if they do then need to, have more time with me, or that I need to sit down and talk to them, that I make that time and that I'm there and present in that time. So I talk about, blocking out, make an appointment, because that means then you've got my full attention. It's a bit hard to, have a conversation in a corridor about something that is quite, perhaps debilitating or very personal, or, so to really advocate for making that time to sit down with the staff. I also have a team around me where, the skill sets are very different, and I hopefully encourage them to work to their skills. And as I said earlier, it shouldn't matter what, if they have a condition or not, if they're able to do the work and have the skill base, then I'm very keen to work with them on that. So I'm hoping that I'm approachable as a manager is the biggest thing, and that I'm respectful of other situations, because I've been through it myself, essentially.
Yeah, and I think, I look at that same scenario too, Jane, and the best thing that I do in my capacity as a leader today is I spend a lot of time reflecting on the great leaders that I've worked with and worked under throughout the journey of my own career. And particularly when I've been through some up and down moments from a health perspective, I always look towards the experience and the support I had from the best people that I worked with and under, and then try and use that to apply that to, that very important point of being empathetic to everyone that you work with, because the more we can demonstrate that as one of our key leadership characteristics, the greater the output and the greater the contribution that we're going to get from people, because they're going to feel comfortable and feel like they're working in a trusted and respected environment. And so that's been my own experience, is always looking back on who were the best people that supported me and what did I appreciate the most, so that then I can share that with others that might be going through difficult challenges themselves.
Yeah, and I guess I'm very conscious of not trying to put my experience on other people. One of the things we learn when we're working in health is that we do listen, and that we don't bring our own stories into what people are trying to tell us. But in the back of your mind, as you said, you can sit there and go, oh, what worked for me, or how can I help this person, be it a client or a staff member. And also I think we have experience, well, I have experience of, being a mother, also a mother of a child who, ended up with the same condition as me. And I'm just reflecting on the fact that the people that I lead in my department, they're a lot younger than I am. And so they're all going through different situations. And so I hope that I can, still be empathetic to all of those, both not just because of the medical journey I've had, but also, as a parent, as a pet owner, even, these days we've got so many things that go on in people's lives, just to find that inner strength to kind of go, okay, I might be feeling like this today, but this person needs me at the moment. And so that ability to kind of compartmentalise a little bit what I'm experiencing and focus wholly on that person in my team.
Yeah. Now I'm going to move to thinking about more broadly from a company perspective, rather than an individual leader point of view. But have you got any belief around what organisations can do to help their employees either feel safe, feel comfortable in coming forward and identifying that there may be an issue that they're dealing with, that they may need to create that environment where they feel confident to confide in a colleague or a leader?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a little bit more and thinking about what our organisation does as well. And I think organisations need to invest in their leaders to be able to manage people in this respect. You know, sure, we can do all the, you know, we know that the KPIs and the budgets and the targets and all of those things, but some of that people management skill, I think, can be, you know, taught a little more. We all have HR departments, etc., and they've all got great programs, but having somewhere that the managers and leaders also feel safe to go and, I guess, upskill or have some health literacy perhaps in the organisation is one thing. The other is, I guess, safe spaces, that people feel that they can go and, you know, regenerate in an area, and that it's not, you know, frowned upon. And also facilities, so, you know, bathroom facilities, lifts facilities, things like that, that surely, you know, a lot of larger organisations who are perhaps working in the city and things can do that because of the buildings they're in, but, you know, perhaps other areas can look at that as well. And wellbeing programs, I think, again, the last couple of years have shown us that, you know, everybody can benefit from some wellbeing programs. Having access to even just, you know, healthy foods or healthy initiatives, you know, walk and talk type meetings, things where people can feel a little bit more relaxed and allows them to open up a little bit more with their managers, with their leaders. As I said, I've been lucky enough to feel supported in most of the organisations that I've worked, but that's the industry I'm in. So I'd be interested to hear from you, Brent, with respect to what you found has worked as well over the years in the different places that you've worked.
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and I think we're almost touching on one of the issues that I was going to raise as well, which is the unintended consequence of having people living with a hidden condition in the workplace is sometimes the flow-on effect on mental health. And particularly over the last couple of years during the COVID years, we've really seen that come to the fore in terms of the importance of our mental health and well-being, and exactly what you said. So in some of the experiences that I've had is that support around accessing what you need when you need it. So if it means that you need to take a break during the middle of the day, if it means that you want to get enrolled in various wellness programs that your organisation supports, if it means that you need to get involved in other aspects outside of your normal working life to actually help get that balance right, then it's actually a combination of all of those things combined that can actually help support positive mental health, so that, you know, a hidden condition that anyone might be dealing with doesn't deteriorate and have unintended consequences. So I think there's a combination of a lot of factors, but I think it's important that there's no one size fits all. It has to suit the individual and how they're trying to manage through their own situation that they're facing.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, talking from experience, an invisible illness is very, very mentally taxing. It's very, yes. It's exhausting. Sometimes it's exhausting just, you know, if whatever you're experiencing is very active at the time, it's exhausting, you know, getting out of bed, putting one foot in front of the other. Not that you don't want to do those things, you want to be at work, because that is actually a distraction as well. So when you're at work, you're giving 100%, because that's where you want to be. So I think, you know, we know that happy employees, you know, work best and they want to be at work. So that I think is important to consider. Yeah. Yeah.
And more about organisational culture as well is maybe a question, and this would be great for people who are listening in today, is what do we think individuals within a workplace can do if they want to support a colleague that they may guess or indeed know has been challenged by a hidden condition? Because some people, they fear having that conversation because they don't know how it's going to be responded to or reacted to. What would your suggestion for those in the workplace who want to reach out to others be about how to do that within a strong organisational culture?
Yeah, well, I guess that question, the "Are you okay?" question, actually ask it with intent to listen to the response, first of all. because I think that's really important, and that goes back to what I said before about making sure you have the time to actually listen to someone and to support them, and perhaps more open-ended questions rather than even the "Are you okay?" which is a yes or no. It's you know, how are you going today? What have you been up to this week? Those sorts of things, and then you might gauge a bit more from that person. And obviously, it's going to be with people that you're comfortable with. You're not going to perhaps just launch into that sort of a conversation with someone. But if you can see someone is, you know, looking down, or you know, you can see that their work's changed a little bit, perhaps some open-ended questions that actually show some compassion and empathy, and indicates that yes, you're here to listen and that you do care. That's my main thing, I guess, and giving that people the opportunity to talk or not to talk. That silence is okay too. Maybe just sit down and have a cup of coffee with someone, and just be there. That might be enough to then the next time that person might open up a little bit more. And part of the reason probably why people don't ask or don't give the information to is that privacy thing. People, you know, we need to respect people's privacy, and we also don't want people to feel that we're going to abuse that trust, I guess. So that's always going to be in the back of someone's mind, I would imagine. And keeping an eye on people's just work practices, workloads. If anything's a bit different, maybe that's the indicator that, you know, something's not quite right. And it may not be, you know, the condition we're talking about today. It could be the myriad of those other ones that I mentioned before. But be prepared for the answer, I guess, is the question. And that's where that health literacy stuff comes back to. Be prepared for the answer and know what to do, you know, to help the person as well. And if your organisation has robust policies, protocols and initiatives in place, then I think people will feel more able to have those conversations.
Yeah, and one of the observations that I think we've all been able to make over the last couple of years too, from a hidden condition perspective, is with so many people spending more time working from home in a hybrid working environment, there's a lot of increasing factors that we don't know about people either. So we may just assume that they're going to be readily available for a Teams conversation or a Zoom chat without understanding that there may be some other issues. And because the physical presence is not there, we don't necessarily understand other factors that are going on too. So I think it just adds another layer of complexity to how we work through the support for people with hidden conditions as well.
And I think if there are people out there who are struggling with an invisible illness, is also to inform themselves, like, you know, find out what is available either in the organisation or in the industry, you know, and seek help. You know, go get help outside the organisation if you must, to start with, so that you can start having those conversations and looking after your own well-being as well.
And then I was only going to finish off on one final one, and you mentioned this before, and it's another experience that we share, unfortunately, in having a child that has unfortunately inherited the wrong side of the gene pool, and living with the same condition that we both do. There's a lot of other parents out there within the workforce who are dealing with, you know, children dealing with different issues, and much the same as it is for an individual managing a hidden condition, sometimes we don't know what's happening within a wider home front and the level of support that's necessary there. So have you had any experiences around the support that you've received, if you've openly shared it with your employers, around what's been provided to support you in what you've been able to do to support your son?
Yeah, so similar to what I guess I've done for myself in the organisation is I've, you know, accessed the carer leave. I've spoken to the managers about it. Obviously tried to give definitive times where I might need to be off work. I guess that was the main thing when it happened to us, and you know, my son was 10 at the time, so I needed a significant amount of time off while, you know, that diagnosis was occurring, and then when he went into having surgery and things. But a strength I guess I got was that I kind of did know what he was possibly experiencing. Again, very different, very much younger, but that it was important for me at the time to also show him that you could still, still achieve things, that you will get through this, and that there are people out there to support you as well. So that was also really important. So there will be people in the workforce that, as you said, we don't know what goes on at home, or, what else they're dealing with. And so I don't see the support very much different to being if it was them that actually had the illness themselves. I think organisations need to embrace the whole employee, which might mean, what else comes with them. There are employee assistance programs out there.
Yeah.
That extends to families usually. So, to know what is available out there and to use it so that you can balance work and life and feel that you're actually still contributing to in so many ways without feeling threatened, I guess. Which
is a really, really important point. And I go through my own experience. My son was 6 when he was diagnosed with it too. And as he's growing and developing, the point that you raised is an important one, is younger people dealing with those confronting challenges need people to look up to help be a guiding light for them around what still can be achieved. And the organisations that we work for, the support that they provide to the parents, because we need to be able to provide that guiding light, and allowing our own careers to grow and flourish and evolve, has a flow-on effect. So the organisation itself, through the support they provide to the parent, is actually having a direct impact on our children too. And I don't think we should ever understate that as well.
No, my gut feeling is that perhaps organisations don't always realise that that's the effect they're having.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. Now, I think that sort of winds up the official conversation piece between us. And I can't thank you enough for your willingness to have a pretty open conversation and explore the importance of what we've been talking about. So I'm going to hand back to Claire now in the event that there's any questions that are going to be thrown our way. Jane.
Thanks, Brent.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jane and Brent. And look, we've had quite a few questions come through, which is fantastic. So as a reminder to our audience, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please do post them in the Q&A panel now, and we'll get through as many as we can in the time that we have. Jane, I actually have a question that I would like to start with, if that's okay, which is just to say, as a manager, if someone is away from work unwell due to a flare-up of a condition, I think some people might feel uncertain about striking that right balance between reaching out to show that you care when an employee is unwell, but also fearing that you might be being too intrusive on them. Do you have any hints for people around striking that right balance?
Yeah, so I guess I can speak from experience of not someone with, one of these illnesses, but certainly the way that I've managed other situations is that texting is amazing. So, we have an understanding that if someone's going to be off sick for the day, they don't text, they call, and we have a verbal conversation. And then we kind of, have a bit of a, how long do you think you might be off, that sort of thing, and not, I don't always ask, what is the condition necessarily, but, if they're going to go off to the doctor, then they get a medical certificate, then they, it makes life a lot easier as a manager to kind of do that in my workplace. But yeah, texting just to say, how are you going? Is there anything I can do for you, basically? And I will always get a text back, essentially. And then when it gets closer to the time that they are due back, I'll always call and have another verbal conversation. And I'll just make those questions very open-ended. I'm not going to say, are you coming back tomorrow? But I'll say, how are you feeling? And just try and engage, what the person is telling me. And I've had situations, certainly in this whole COVID time, we can't necessarily work come into work or when we've got the sniffles. Back in the day, used to soldier on, not so anymore in healthcare. And, you know, having to have that conversation is important, because I don't want people coming back if they're then going to, you know, fall in a heap again a couple of days later. We don't want sick people in the working necessarily, if it's going to make them worse. So we need to be, I guess, guided by the person as well. You know, are you really ready to come back? And I've had situations where people have been off for a much longer time, where I have, you know, gone to my HR and said, okay, this person wants to return. How do we make it easy for them to come back? It wasn't a work-related incident, but they want to come back to work. So what can we do? And, you know, it will be a graded return to work or something along those lines. So I think it's really important to work with the person and to ask those open-ended questions.
Yes, the beauty of text as well, just going back to that initial point, is that people can respond in their own time as well.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Reduces that intrusiveness.
Mm.
Jane, another question that's come through that I might ask to you and then perhaps throw to Brent in case he's got any input on this one. Were there any cases where your employer or your manager really didn't deal with things well? And why was that, or what did they essentially get wrong that we can learn from?
Yeah, look, I have to say in my case, no, I've been extremely lucky through the years. And I don't know why that is, because I know that's not the situation for everybody. But it could be the industry. I don't know. So, Brent, I am going to throw to you, because I actually don't have a negative situation for me personally.
Yeah, it's well, I've had one pretty horrific example of where a manager got it wrong, and it's many years ago now. But it all comes back to the point of empathy, respect, understanding, and an appreciation of what's going on. Like a lot of us, Jane, it was a period of time where I was waylaid in hospital undergoing treatment. And my employer at the time had an expectation that I was going to manage a product launch, and I was unable to attend for obvious reasons. And it might come pretty clear what his background was when I tell you what the response was, but his view was immediately that that was no excuse and that I needed to actually front up, because if I didn't, it was going to be an act of insubordination. And that leadership style and approach is something I'll never forget, because it was a great lesson in understanding if you get the empathy piece wrong, the whole thing can come crashing down, and all it does is contribute to a further deterioration of the individual's health.
Mm. Yeah, and I can comment on a time when I got it wrong. And again, it wasn't a chronic sort of invisible illness, but the person had been off work for some time, had indicated they wanted to come back. We had talked about it, but I didn't. We have our services across a couple of sites, so I hadn't actually thought about where they'd be going back to. And that was the clincher. So again, the conversation we had just wasn't extensive enough about, you know, what I thought and what they thought were two different things. And so that person, you know, replied to me via an email, which then as a manager I felt absolutely dreadful about, because that, you know, that wasn't my intention at all. So I think, you know, not give yourself some slack, but we're all going to make mistakes sometimes. So let's try and work out how we can, you know, work with the person to repair that, which we then were able to do in this situation. But it could have been quite ugly. So just to admit, yeah, that sometimes we get it wrong, and we need to work with it, with people to fix it.
Learning from our mistakes.
Definitely.
Good point. Jane, someone has asked, how do you deal with feelings of obligation in having, I guess, times or your experience differ to that of your colleagues? Someone said their colleagues are very supportive of, I'm assuming they have a condition that they deal with. Mm-hmm. Their colleagues are very supportive, but they struggle with feeling like they're enough.
Sorry, who's, I'm not understanding the question. Do I feel like I'm enough? Is that I'm giving enough?
So.
Is that the question?
Yeah, someone's saying that they struggle with feeling like they're giving enough even though their colleagues are supportive. Yeah. Do you experience that?
I have a theory, unbased theory, that people who have an invisible illness, almost type A personalities. I don't know, just putting it out there, that's me. That I think, you know, we want to do more all the time. We want to be able to fix things. We can't necessarily fix what's going on with ourselves, and so we want to make sure that, you know, we're doing everything else right. I think we have to say, you know, today I've done enough. You know, tomorrow I might do more, but today this is what I can do and do well, because nobody likes to do things half-heartedly. They want to do things well. So if people are supportive, I think, you know, I think go with that. I think when people offer, I don't know, in a situation, people offer to cook you some meals or something, go for it. Say yes, thanks. And then next time it can be your turn to do something else for them. So it kind of goes, you know, what goes around comes around, pay it forward, all of that. I know they're all sayings, but I really think that in those situations, there are days when what we're doing it has to be enough. Yeah. If that answers the question.
I think so, thank you. Jane, someone has said that they are a disabled and chronically ill employee who works from home due to travel being very difficult for them, and that they've had a lot of trouble finding work from home positions, even though they're highly qualified in their position. So they've said, how can we ensure companies support those who cannot work in the office but are still able to participate? And how do we ensure that we're not discriminating against those who cannot physically come into an office? But any thoughts on that one?
I know, Brent, I might throw to you on that one as well, but I think, I mean, that's the whole, I have to say people are worried that their illness is not going to be used against them, but that it stops them from getting promotions or getting, you know, a work. I don't know, as a manager who employs people, you know, I haven't been in that situation, but you know, I certainly look at, you know, what's sent through on paper, you know, resume and skill set before offering, you know, an interview anyway. So I would hope that that is happening. Again, I can't speak for, you know, the wider industry with that. I think if you can do the work from home, then, you know, is that a big problem? Is there a reason? Is there part of the role that has to be on site? I mean, obviously that means that you can't necessarily do the role, but can the role be modified? Is that something that organisations are happy to think about? Yeah, I know, Brent, have you got an answer for that one?
Yeah, look, and I can say this, you know, in a positive light in terms of my current employer, WTW, is the transparency of the conversation with the right people. And pre-COVID, my role necessitated a lot of travel, which doesn't necessarily agree with what we live with. And I know that there are specific or certain times of day, every day, where I struggle versus other times. And having those open conversations to say, if I commit to certain travel requirements, then this is how I need to manage it to be able to best deliver the service that I know I need to deliver, and how much flexibility the organisation can provide to me to be able to support that. And has been fantastic. So I've been able to continue commitments to travel and, you know, start to resume that in a post-COVID world. But I know I do it with the support of the organisation that's looking after, you know, my health and well-being at the same time. So I think definitely the transparency of the conversation about what's required to get the best out of the person is a really good place to start.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one or two more questions. Jane, are there any particular models of reintegration that you suggest our viewers could research, specifically to do with transitioning employers back to work after an illness or an injury?
As in, is there anything I would go to read or look at? Yeah, not that I have access to. I mean, today I've been speaking from, you know, my own experience and what I've implemented. I think having that conversation with the employee and understanding what your organisation can actually provide, I think, are two key things. And what I just said earlier about really looking at the role. So does there need to be, you know, a change in the role in order to accommodate the person and keep them in that workforce? But every condition is going to be different, and that's why I think it's really important to speak to the person involved. Because as Brent was saying, you know, you might have a day where you can work 5 days a week that week, and then the following week you can't. So maybe there has to be something in an understanding between employee and manager to know when does that come into effect and what do you do. So I just think that open, transparent, respectful conversation about what limitations might be, when they might be, and how that can look for your organisation.
Beautiful, thanks, Jane. Unfortunately, even though we've got more questions that have come through, I think we need to close up today's session because we have been asked to keep things on time because there are other dive-in sessions running back to back. So I would very much like to extend my sincere thanks to Jane and Brent for sharing their personal experiences and knowledge with us. It really was a fascinating discussion, and I know I am particularly floored at the knowing how many people actually live with a hidden condition. I think that's really very, very interesting, almost quite scary, I think. So look, I hope it's a conversation that's given our audience lots of food for thought, both personally and from an organisational perspective. So thank you very much, Jane and Brent. I would also like to again thank the Gutsy Group for being our co-sponsor today. And if any of our audience members would like to find out more about the Gutsy Group and their research, you can visit their website at thegutsygroup.com.au as shown on the screen there. And lastly, I'd also like to thank obviously all our attendees who've dialed in for the session today and helped form that Q&A discussion, which I think was really interesting. So a replay link for the webinar will be made available in due course via Dive-In case you want to watch it again or share it with your colleagues. So that is all from us today. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great afternoon and bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.